just a cottage below, a little silver and a little gold. But in that city where the ransom will shine, I want a gold one that's silver line. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are purest gold. Don't think me poor or deserted or lonely. I'm not discouraged, I'm heaven bound. I'm just a pilgrim in search of a city. I want a mansion, a robe and a crown. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are purest gold.
All right. I know we've got several prayer requests. I'll just start off. I had a senior moment, though. I couldn't remember the second person from the pantry. I know one was Miss Ishii. What was the other? Bless you. What was the other one, Miss Chris? Breeding? Breeding. Miss Breeding, okay. Okay, so breathing problems, and she's in the Ocean Springs Hospital, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is it a cat or a dog? I got him on here. It's a PET scan. What are you talking about? Come on. No, I have him on here. In fact, I got it for Jeff and Michelle. But PET scan on Friday? Okay. So Friday will be the 15th. I was going to throw in there, add a little levity here. This guy goes in to see the doctor, and the doctor says, well, I'm not sure what's wrong, so we need to do a CAT scan. So goes in there, and he has the CAT scan, and sure, he comes out, and all of a sudden he looks, and here comes this cat walking out the door. And he said, that's kind of strange, and loud pets in the doctor's office. So all of a sudden he goes out there and he's checking out, and they give him the bill, and they said, oh my gosh, it's $200? And he said, yeah. He said, I thought it was only $50 for the office visit. He said it was, but then he picked up the cat and he says $150 for the CAT scan. So anyways, okay, so let me add on here. So I've got also Miss Helen Wilson, David and Lloyd, her sons, Miss Jane Henson, Carol Rooney. She's been in some bad pain. I'm not sure, anybody got an update on Carol Rooney? No? Okay. Catherine Ponset was not doing well this past, she wasn't here the other day. Also, Mary Bellamy continues to have her medical issues. Monty and Kathy Armstrong, continue to pray for them. Monty and senior and junior were both here Sunday, but I didn't get to talk to them. So anyways, just please keep them in your prayers. And then again, I had Jeff and Michelle, and we just will pray that the PET scan will say that it's isolated, that the prostate cancer is just restricted to just well, they're looking at the sites, right, the individual sites. Okay. Okay. So this like a deep tissue type? I think it's, okay. 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 And then I've got one other one that I'm aware of. Cindy Harrison um, is asking for silent prayers for a loved one. She didn't go into who that was or what exactly that meant, but she just wants prayers. So just pray for Cindy and her loved one. I'm not sure what that is, but anyways, what other prayer requests do we have? Yeah, she's still in the Chase River. Well, that'd be good. Yeah, she's literally, I don't know if you've been out there when I went to visit her. By the way, she thinks she's allowed to have visitors now. But they aren't issuing the mask anymore when you come in the door. So either they've isolated or quarantined or they've gotten rid of all the COVID. But anyway, she lives right next door to Chase River. I mean, if you're facing the Chase River facility, she lives to the right. There's some apartments. So she literally lives right there. But phone calls, River Chase, okay, transposition there. I got the words mixed up. So anyways, River Chase. So, and she's in number 2, I believe, is the room. Okay. Any other prayer requests? I guess Dorinda and Dwayne and Bree, any update on them? Okay. Yeah. Well, we definitely want to keep Dorinda then in our prayers as well. Because believe me, if the medication, each one is different. It depends on the individual, how they react and stuff. And yeah. Okay. Well, we'll just pray for her treatment regime or regimen, whatever you want to call it. Well, that's good. Well, again, the mind is the most powerful thing, and when we let go and let God, a lot of times things happen that we don't expect. Any other prayer requests? Okay. What's that? Who's traveling back? Okay. Anybody else? Okay, if you would, let's bow. Oh, Brian Adams, yeah. I'm not sure. He said he wasn't feeling well and he sounded really congested type. And so, anyway, just keep Brian in your prayers. Thanks for reminding me, Angie. Because I talked to him probably about 2 hours ago and he didn't sound real good. So, anyways. All right, let's go to God in prayer. God our Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the blessings and Father, for all the opportunities that you've given us and the opportunity we had today to serve your children. And Father, we want to lift up some of our church family and some of our loved ones, Father, and we ask that you would be with Miss Breeding and Ann Ishii, as they both are not feeling well, Father, and we know Miss Ishii has breathing problems, and Miss Breeding has knee problems. And Father, We ask you to be with those that are tending to them, that they can diagnose them properly and be able to get them back to their much wanted and needed health. We ask that you'd be with Helen Wilson and David and Lloyd, her two sons, as they continue their recovery, and Miss Wilson continues to battle courageously with her illnesses. And Father, we ask that you'd watch over them and give them that comfort in their time of trial. We ask you to be with Jane Henson as she continues, Father, to battle her medical conditions, as well as Carol Rooney, who's in a lot of pain. And we ask that you would help her, Father, to mitigate that pain and help the doctors to properly diagnose her as she prepares, I believe it's around the 28th of this month, to have surgery. We ask that you be with Catherine Ponset, as well as Mary Bellamy, and Father, we know that they also have their continuing medical issues, and we're thankful when they're able to come and worship with us, but when they're not, Father, we ask that you help them and not only stay faithful, but to continue to study and worship and glorify your name. Be with Monty and Kathy Armstrong, Father, and their son Monty, as they continue to battle their medical issues. And we want to lift up Jeff and Michelle Howe. Father, we praise you for allowing us to get the knowledge that it was restricted to simply the prostate, and now as he prepares for his cancer treatments in the upcoming days, Father, we ask that the PET scan, Father, would be able to give them the information they need so that they can properly treat it and do it in short order, so that Jeff and Michelle can have that burden lifted off of their minds. Father, be with Cindy Harrison. Cindy has asked for prayers, as you know, Father, for a loved one. Not sure what's going on, but we know that you know. And we ask that you be with not only Cindy and her family, but with her loved ones as well, as they continue to fight the issues that are bothering them. We ask that you be with Susie, and we're thankful that her surgery was successful, and that, Father, she has been rehabilitating, seems to be doing well, and we hope and pray that maybe she'll be able to come and worship with us on Sunday. And we know she's still got a ways to go, but continue to watch over her so that her treatment and rehabilitation will be successful. We ask that you continue to watch over Dorinda, and that, Father, they will not only give her the proper regimen that she needs to get her treatment, but, Father, they'll be able to cut back on her medication and find the right strength so that it will not only be effective, but, Father, she'll be able to function more normally than she is right now. Be with Robin Hayes as she's about to travel back home tomorrow, and be with our brother Brian Adams as he is not feeling well, and it's got some kind of sinus thing going on. And Father, we know that's going around right now, but watch over him, and Father, help him to get back to his normal health so he and Mary can return and worship with us. Be with us always, Father. Forgive us our sins. It's in your Son, our Savior's name, Jesus, we offer this prayer. Amen. One more song and you're welcome.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, O my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before, O my soul. I'll worship your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before, O my soul. I'll worship your holy name. You're rich in love and you're slow to anger. Your name is great and your heart is kind. For all your singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find, to bless the Lord, O my soul, O my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before, O my soul. I'll worship your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come, still my soul will sing your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before, O my soul. I'll worship your holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before, O my soul. I'll worship your holy name. I'll worship your holy name. I'll worship your holy name.
Okay, well, tonight we're going to be continuing again our study of Esther. We're on lesson 7. So if you haven't got a book, I think. What's on second? I don't know who's on third. Okay. By the way, Alan Fain years ago did a skit about that. I still remember that. It was at his mom and dad's house. It's quite hilarious. I'd never seen it before that, but I've remembered it all these years. Anyway, so if you remember last week, we were talking about how Mordecai was sitting outside and waiting, and so Mordecai was trying to give a warning to Esther. And so tonight we're going to study a little more in depth on that. So here we go. We're going to be reading from Esther 4, verses 10 through 17. It's on page 53 in your books. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king, who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all of the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did everything to all that Esther commanded him. So, what do you see in there that grabs your attention? Well, let me start out here. Get you, hopefully, y'all picked out some of this stuff. But what about the fact there's risk involved? When you go to see the king, if you look in verse 11, basically he says he only has one law. And that's basically everybody that will get put to death that comes in, if he doesn't feel it's a good reason to come to him, the only one that he will spare will be the one he holds a gold scepter out to. So there's a risk involved. Anytime you ask to see the king, in other words, you better have your ducks in a row. Because if he's not happy, you're certainly not going to be happy, because he's going to have you put to death. So what then did Mordecai, and who was Mordecai, in relation to Esther? Cousin. So now what all of a sudden does he say to Esther? Yeah, you better tell him. And so he said, do not think in your heart you will escape in the king's palace any more than what? The other Jews. Now, why is that significant? What has Esther been hiding all this time? Yeah, she's a Jew. She's Jewish. She has not told him, nobody. And even Mordecai hasn't released it. And then, of course, she replied and said, fast for me, because basically she's accepted her fate. Whatever happens, if I perish, I perish. All right, anything else about that? Okay. I want somebody, let's see. Well, let me jump down here. Let's go to page 54. If you look in the middle of the introductory paragraph there, it starts with the words by emphasizing. It's on the fifth line. It says, by emphasizing the cruel and domineering nature of King Ahasuerus in his previous dealings with Queen Vashti, and by describing how easily he agreed to Haman's suggestion to destroy, or Haman's suggestion to destroy some of the people in his kingdom, the author set the stage for the almost impossible task facing Queen Esther. Ahasuerus had already removed one queen for disobedience. What would stop him from removing another? And what do we say was set aside for those queens that were removed? They had their own home, right? Kind of a second home. And all those that had been dethroned, if you want to call it that, were put in that house. And so now Vashti, she wasn't put to death, even though she defied the king's command in front of all his leaderships of the province and their wives. So when we consider the importance of King Ahasuerus' place on outward appearances, we have a better understanding of Esther's difficult situation. After learning of Haman's decree, Mordecai urged her to go into the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. Why would he do that? Why? Because surely it's going to eventually come out she's a Jew, but now he's sending her to plead on behalf of the Jews. Why would he do, what would make him think she might be successful? Preparation. And so they had been there a long time, and absolutely, it was a miracle. God's hand is in there. She was put there for a reason. And just like we are all put here for a reason. What else? What? Yep, exactly. military. And so her husband had an in that case, and just like for the men, the ladies had an in. So if oftentimes they wanted something, hey, what better way than when they're sitting there? And most people, they don't imagine it's go to bed and they're out, they talk. And so that was the way people were able to get to whoever they were trying to, whether it be the male or female, just to talk to their spouse. What's that? Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely, those are both good reasons. Any other thoughts on that as to why Esther would be a good person to get to him? Absolutely. We talk about how charismatic she was. Remember how everybody seemed to like her? She came in there and she kind of stood out. In fact, she was given a favorable room in the king's palace, if you remember that. And also, one of the eunuchs took to her. And so the king assigned a special eunuch to help take care of her and prep her. Well, it kind of does, but in the same token, who else is he going to listen to if he doesn't listen to the queen? Because remember, he's got a whole kingdom out here. And if Casey were the queen, Brian the king, and nobody listened to what Casey said, what do you think the other women in the kingdom are going to do? Hey, if he doesn't listen to the queen, what does that mean for me? Does he even care I exist? So it's very important. Yeah, absolutely. And there was one other thing that came out last week we talked about that Esther did that the other ones didn't do. When it came time to be with the king, what did she do different than the others? She didn't ask for any favors, and how did she act, and what did she wear? What he wanted. She was the only one, if you remember. The other ones were like, oh, I think that would have been on me. And they adorned themselves and did all the things for what they wanted. And she was the only one that listened to what the eunuch was advising her. Hey, the king likes this, the king likes that. And so, again, those four things, you put them together, it helps put her in a position of influence, if you will. Of course, she can't override the king, but in the same token, she has an in. And that's the thing we have to remember. Any other thoughts about that? Okay, and we already said that in verse 11 talks about that unless the king showed mercy, they would be put to death. So if you look down there, the last one, it says, given his hesitancy to be perceived by his subject as anything other than strong and decisive, the mission seemed impossible. Because remember, what did he do when they had the big festival? And then they had the week-long festival. And if you remember, that's when Vashti was supposed to come out and dance and, do whatever the king said, commanded her, and she denied him. And so what did the king end up doing? How did he come up with this punishment? Yeah, he talks to his leaders and advisors and said, hey, what do you think I should do? And there's one of them in particular that stuck out that he decided, hey, that's the way we're going to go. So her fate was written already. And if you look, that's what they're saying in those lines, is that anything other than strong and decisive, the mission seemed impossible because the king was strong and decisive. And remember, very rarely did kings reverse when they gave a command or put something into effect, a law. They did not reverse it very often. Okay. So the situation, as it said there on page 54, the situation was extremely bleak. And thankfully, the blessings of God never cease. When things appear darkest, hope remains. And one of my favorite saying, as long as there is life, there is hope. And so that's one of the things that we have to realize. No matter how bleak the situation appears, there's always hope. And so Esther had been put there for a reason, and she was willing to accept her fate, no matter what it was. And this gets back to, Marguerite, what you're saying on the second line on the last paragraph on page 54. God's unseen hand ushered Esther to her royal position, and his wonderful providence guided her efforts. Sometimes we forget to let God guide us. we don't really hear when he's trying to guide us. Or maybe something happens, you go, I don't understand that. Maybe that's God trying to steer you a different way. So we just need to sometimes, as we say, take that pregnant pause and just think about it a minute. Do you guys ever have that? Do you have anything that your little techniques when you feel like you're stressed out or anxious or something? Is there something you do? You have that moment where you say, okay, I need to slow down. You ever heard that? Sometimes you got to slow down to speed up. Anybody have any techniques we used to use that you use personally? You're willing to share? Breathing. That's one. Why? Because naturally, you have to take a nice deep breath, slow and exhale. You automatically slow your heart rate down and less of the rate. And so that helps. What else? Absolutely. One of the strangest things I saw was when I was in Japan. It wasn't strange, it was actually a good thing. It was strange because it was different to me. And I'm sitting there and I was staying in this hotel in the shower that was out that tall. It was much more lower, I think, as well. But they're made for the people that are normally there. But all of a sudden I hear this like siren stuff going off. And what was going on? And I open the window shade and I look outside. There's this factory. And I'm in Tokyo, Japan. And so I'm sitting there for a while. And all of a sudden every single worker in the factory comes out and they're exercising. I've never seen anything like that in the United States. The entire shutdown come out. Why? Because what happened? Any y'all exercise? I know it's been a few months since I've done. Okay, I know Brian does already. But don't you feel better when you're done exercising? I mean, you get those endorphins going, and you really feel good. But that's what the mindset they're in. I mean, you go to Mexico, they have a siesta every day. Every single day, they have a siesta in the afternoon. What's that? Yeah, Italy. Yep. So anyways, there are techniques. One of the things I know we used to use when we were flying, we call it hacking the clock, winding the clock. Because in any emergency, I don't care, and Ron, he's a fellow aviator, he knows this. When any emergency, you don't just start pushing buttons and pulling things unless it's a slow release. You do that like engine fire and everything in flight, because they're both just shooting without even thinking. But there are times when you use your career, you just act like you're winding the clock. And so make you think. Because in any emergency, like in the aircraft I flew, you have a 2 to 3 second reaction time built in automatically. So before you do something, because sometimes when you disconnect things, you can't get them back online. So the point is that use that technique. And that's what was sitting here all of a sudden. She's like, look, even though the situation is bleak, God has got her back. And he's talking to her. Take that, slow down just a little bit, listen. But she made wise decisions. And so before she approached the king, as said in Esther 4:16, she asked that the Jews fast on her behalf. And she knew God's help was needed, and she wanted to petition him. If you look in Lamentations, in your book there on page 55, I'll read this. It says, through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. It's just like reading the Bible. Ever had a verse and you've read it dozens of times probably, and you read it and all of a sudden something pops out to you. And it's like, wow, it's something new. It's just like all the times that we talked about when Jesus was being crucified. I didn't remember the fact that all of the soldiers that came to arrest Jesus fell back at the same time. If that didn't prove to them who that was, even though they weren't going to let him out of his fate, the point was they all fell back. And great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I hope in him. So we, as it said, would do well to learn from and follow Esther's example by seeking God's help before we attempt to solve life's problems. Rhetorically, I ask, do you do that? Do you petition God when you're sitting there and you're about to make what could be a life-changing decision, or you find yourself in a situation that you don't want to be in, do you pray about it before you make that decision and ask God to guide you? Because if you do, I'm going to tell you, I'm not saying you're going to make a perfect decision, but I think you may make a better decision than you would have made before without thinking about it. Any thoughts on that? Okay, so let's go down to page 55, no summons for Esther. So after he learned about Haman's murderous decree, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. What was the murderous decree? And y'all remember? They were going after the Jews, right? Yep. All in one day. I mean, this was going to be a massacre. You're probably talking along the scale of what happened during World War II. Of course, this was before World War II, long time. But the point is this was going to be just a dreadful and treacherous event. And so he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. This is talking about Mordecai. The Jewish statesman understood the threat he and his people faced, and his outward expressions of grief did not escape the notice of Esther's maids and eunuchs. Now, if you saw somebody and you didn't know they were Jewish, and now all of a sudden the king has put out this decree that says, hey, we're going after them. We're going to go out and kill them, not just over a period of time, but in one day. Wow. So what would that demonstrate if you saw somebody and all of a sudden they're dressed in sackcloth and got ashes all over them? They're Jewish. So now I just associate you're one of them. Guess what you just done? You made yourself a target. But again, Mordecai at this point was more concerned that he wanted Esther to know. Because remember, what did Mordecai have that a lot of the other Jews did not have? Access. Is that what you said? I'm sorry. Yeah, access to the king's palace. And he worked out in the garden. And he was near the gates, remember, when all this stuff was going on. So he already had a position that allowed him to be privy to some of the stuff that a lot of the other Jews did not know. So his outward expressions didn't escape, like we said, Esther's maids and eunuchs, their notice. So although Esther did not know why Mordecai mourned openly, she attempted to comfort her beloved guardian. What do you remember what she did to try to comfort him? Yeah, tried to give him some clothes. One, that would help keep him from being a target. Number two, she tried to give him some food and stuff too. He didn't want it, right? Not at that point. He was grieving. And so it says, it did not offer the garments she had, or accept, and instead Mordecai revealed the reason for his grief, and he presented Esther's eunuch with a copy of the written decree for their destruction, and he demanded that she go before the king and plead for the lives of her people. Now, what do you think? Do you think that eunuch took a risk? Oh, absolutely he did. And I think that's where God's hand was also played. Because here's this eunuch. If the king had found out that instead of coming and telling him, hey, look, I was asked to go over and tell the queen about this, because he would have told her anyways. But now it would make her kind of stick out and say, why didn't we tell her? She's Jewish, but he didn't know it at the time. And so, from Mordecai's perspective, this course of action seemed completely reasonable. Esther was the queen, and she was in a position to act. She could speak to the king only if granted the opportunity. So even the queen didn't get that special privilege unless the king allowed her to come in. But like I said, it's a lot different when they lay down to go to bed at night. She's right beside him. So upon hearing, easy for me to say, Hathach's report, Esther sent word that she did not have free access to the king. She said, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king, who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death. And he meant all, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he, in this case, or she, may live. So it was not, well, she's the queen, she'll get a free pass. Oh, no. She played by the same rules when it came to seeing and talking to the king. So to go before Ahasuerus without being summoned was a dangerous proposition. Unless he extended his scepter, death would result. Evidently, Esther did not think her relationship with the king was a good one. He had not called for her in 30 days. If you remember, she was kind of wondering, what's going on? Why hasn't the king sent for me? And the likelihood of his being pleased by her presence, at least in her estimation, was slim. So now she's feeling like, she's asking herself, I went in to see the king initially. He hasn't sent for me in 30 days. Now all of a sudden, he's put out this decree. And now all of a sudden, I'm feeling like, golly, I don't even know if the king is pleased by me anymore, whether or not he's going to be happy, even though I'm the queen. And I just got to see what happened to Vashti. And now all of a sudden, here I am. So she did not initially see herself as the solution to the Jews' problem. In other words, to help save them. And we know how he treated the disobedient queens, as we just talked about. And Esther, I'm sure in her mind, just like that line says there, she would fare better than Vashti. She had no reason to believe that. And there's no indication. The king hadn't even seen her in 30 days. Her doubts outweighed her faith. Surely Mordecai would understand, as far as she was concerned, there had to be another way. Okay, any thoughts on that? Okay. Sometimes in life, have you ever had a circumstance where you've done something that didn't seem like it was the smartest thing to do, but you knew it was the right thing to do? And I'm not asking for any, life stories, but just think about that. Because she's getting ready to do something that she doesn't think is the smartest thing to do, but she knows that perhaps she is the only thing that could save her people. So as they say, it's a zero-sum game. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. Okay, you will not escape. So if Esther thought Mordecai's response would be sympathetic, she was mistaken. Instead, his reply conveyed both his faith and his urgency and the urgency of the matter. In other words, look, there's no time to waste. You got to make up your mind. Are you going to help your people, or are you going to walk away from them? And if you look down about halfway in that paragraph on page 56 under that title, the heading, You Will Not Escape, whether or not Esther believed herself insulated from Haman's threat, she was not. And I don't believe she thought that either, because she already knew what had happened to the previous queens, etc. Although she had not yet revealed her identity to the king, individuals were aware of her connection to Mordecai. And she would be discovered, and she would suffer the same fate as her brethren. Remember what I told you? She was going to have to take a risk, as did the eunuch, by carrying that message. So action was required. But she was the right, as they say, you got to be the right person at the right place at the right time. And Esther met all of those. I love the line there that Mordecai told her, for if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish, without a doubt. Why do you think he would say that the deliverance and relief will arise for the Jews from another place? What was he referring to? What would have him? Why would he say that? Who's going to take care of the Jews? Who's been taking care of them? Huh? God, yeah. And it's not that, oh, you can do this evil thing and get out of it. And go. No, he's going to give you a good out, but it may not seem very good to you. Okay. Lost my place there a second. Okay. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He asked her. And the text does not reveal who Mordecai believed might intervene for the Jews if Esther refused to do so. In other words, they didn't know, but he knew God was behind him. God's going to provide a way. So we're left to wonder, even if this explanation seems most likely, but I think it is. God was going to be the one, just as he did before, by bringing Esther in there and allowing her to become queen. Mordecai believed God would maintain his relationship with the Jews, even if he did not understand how God would protect his people. In God's providence, if you look at the last 3 lines of that paragraph on page 57, it says, in God's providence, each person has a unique task. Thus, Mordecai urged Esther to go before King Ahasuerus on behalf of the Jews. You know, in your walk with God, you should know what your capabilities are. You know what you can do, what you can't do, what you feel comfortable doing. But you know what? Sometimes, if you want to see people rise to help others, to go to a new level in service to God, what do you have to do? How do you get them to grow? One is study, but what else do you do? You ever had somebody challenge? You challenge somebody? Now, I'm going to brag on Angie here for a minute. Angie, I remember back when, I became the preacher and Sarah was leaving and I had to find a secretary. And I remember having a conversation with Angie and she said, I don't know if I can do it. And I said, I have all the faith and confidence in you can. And she's been absolutely wonderful since day one. And so I think God's hand was involved in that because I didn't know who, and Angie just jumped out amongst it. There were several people that we talked to about it. But again, she was the right person at the right place at the right time. And so I wholeheartedly believe that. So she's been a godsend to make sure that the family continues to be able to worship and grow here. So anyways. But yeah, we all know. Let's face it, but Miss Peggy, the thing that's important in this whole thing is all of us have a role. That's the point I was trying to make. And you never know what role you'll find yourself in. Because I know Angie didn't ever anticipate she was going to be the church secretary, and she was a great fit. And so all of us have a part we play, and that's the thing about it is that. We all have a part to play. And if you remember, the Scripture tells us it doesn't matter whether you're the strongest or the weakest. We all have an important role to play. And, the thing is that it's like that the guy, I remember there was a guy that he was doing a funeral, and the guy was a Christian, but he wasn't very active in the church. And the guy that was, performing the funeral for the family, they asked him, said, do you have anything to share? And they really didn't have anything. So the guy stuck to the Scripture, the preacher that was performing the funeral, but he said one thing about it. He said, you know something? I don't know if y'all know, but that man could sure whistle well. And what he normally whistled was hymns. And so you never know when you have that opportunity and when you're actually ministering to somebody, because you know what? If you're whistling a hymn, most people know the tune, if nothing else. What does that do? It tells them you're a believer. And so that helps maybe open a door. Okay, any other thoughts on that? Okay, we got about 9 more minutes. So we're on page 57. Esther begins fast. So the words of Mordecai affected Esther. Her former hesitancy was replaced by resolve. So now she became what? Determined. She was determined now to help her people because she knew that God was there. So rather than arguing further, she proposed a plan of action. So with determination, she sent word to Mordecai to have the Jews fast for her for 3 days. Their fasting would accompany the fasting of Esther and her maids, and during this 3-day period, she and her fellow Jews would seek God's help. Along with her message about the fast, Esther announced her plans. I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. What does that tell you about Esther and her dedication to the Jews? And it's the same, I mean, none of us can compare to Jesus, but isn't it similar to what happened to Jesus? He knew what was going to happen. He knew that he was going to die. And that's why in the Garden of Gethsemane, he asked that the cup be passed from him. Well, in this case, she's accepting that cup. She knows that there's a risk involved. Now, she didn't know for certain, like Jesus did, that he was going to be put to death. She didn't know she was going to be put to death, but she knew there was a big chance of it because all people had said, unless the king held out the gold scepter. Well, it had to do with, I think, with Haman's decree or something. He remember he was the one that came up with the big plan. But and the king was not very happy. Remember, they were at odds. The Persians and the Jews were not friends. And I think he's finally decided, I want them to feel my wrath. Because if you remember, when you have these big feasts, it was all about trying to show my power and my authority. And part of it had to do with all the inebriation and all that. Because during how was it? I want to say it was like 6 months or something. And then they turned around and had a week party right after that. So, yeah. Yeah, they were, well, they wouldn't bow down. And the other thing is, he felt they were a bad part of his provinces, if you remember. They didn't like each other. They did not like each other one bit. Well, yeah. Well, yeah, it's amazing, but they've never been chased off their land, by the way, since they took over. Um, so although the outlook of the Jews remained bleak, there was at least some hope, and Esther courageously committed to doing what she could. And so if God providentially placed her in a position to act, she would not be unfaithful. So those who read the book of Esther today do so with the knowledge that Haman was unsuccessful in his attempt to exterminate the Jews. This lessens the suspense of the story from Esther's perspective. However, the outcome was not so clear. So the queen faced the very real possibility of death, and failure on her part meant that many other Jews would also die. Because if she was unsuccessful, they would go with her. But what they didn't do, if you look at the next line, they did not attempt to avert the crisis alone. They were surely aware of God's promise to take care of his people, and they believed strongly in his providential care. That's one thing we often forget. That still applies to us today. And I'm not saying if you're not Jewish, it doesn't apply. I'm saying if you're a believer, if you're a Christian, God's going to take care of you. It doesn't mean that, something bad may not happen to you. And there's some people that have even been asked to give their life. You remember there was a lady probably about a year ago, I can't remember the country it was in, and they asked her to deny God. And she wouldn't do it. And they threatened to kill her. And she wouldn't do it. And they didn't kill her. They let her go. Yeah. again, it, yep, yep. Doesn't that sound like Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Same thing. And then also, I mean, that like I said, most of them rule with an iron fist because in that part of the world, believe it or not, that a lot of them, that's all they understand is brutal power and authority. And they're not nice people sometimes. Okay, thanks for updating Brian on that. But again, the Persians and the Jews were not, Persians. The Persians and the Jews, where did I come up with Persians? I don't know. The Persians and the Jews are not friends at all. So God's name is not found in the book of Esther, but confidence in his care is surely present. And we see that. There's all the time reference to. And that's what Mordecai was saying. Somebody else will come in, Esther. If you don't do it, somebody will. And he believed that. Okay. So anyways, her willingness to pick up, first of all, to fast indicates her faith in God's ability to respond to the petitions of his people. You know, fasting is one of those things that's very, very difficult. And if you've never done it, it really does. But your body goes through an adaptation period. And, remember what Jesus did? He fasted, remember, for 40 days and 40 nights. And then who came along right after that to tempt him? Satan. Yeah. And so can you imagine you've been fasting for over a month, and now all of a sudden here comes Satan, and he's tempting you? You know he had to be hungry. Remember he talked about turning bread, stones into bread, throwing himself up, and he was with you. Absolutely. Okay. Any other thoughts? Let's see what's, I got to look at lesson 8. I didn't see what the title of that one is. So lesson 8 is going to be Esther's banquets. And we will study that next week. Any closing questions, comments? Well, it's supposed to be clearing up though, hopefully tomorrow. So we'll see. And hopefully some beautiful days. All right. Thank you all. God bless you.